Hey, everybody, I'm Dave Alsobrooks. I'm the Director of Communications at South Carolina Quantum, and I'm lucky enough to be joined today with Dr. Joey Von Nessen. He's an esteemed research economist at USC's Darla Moore School of Business, and he is the recognized expert. He's the guy on our state's economy, and he talks about that in a lot of places every day, every week. So we're lucky to have him here today to talk about quantum and the potential economic impacts of quantum technologies here in the state. What I would like to do first is just open it up in a broad way and just say, having done this study a while back about quantum potential economic impacts here in the state, like what's gotten you excited about quantum and the potential here in the state?
Well, the biggest benefit in the long run associated with quantum technology is going to be the increases in productivity that we see. And that's going to be true globally. And it's certainly going to be true in South Carolina. And what does productivity mean from a practical standpoint? It means more high wage, high skilled jobs for South Carolinians. So more jobs overall and higher skill jobs, which translate into higher wages. Because when we think about economic growth overall, there are only two ways to get it, only two ways to increase productivity, right? Producing more goods and services. One way is to have more people and produce goods and services. And the other way to do it is to have people that can produce faster, right? They can produce more in a given amount of time. And so it's that second piece that can really boost economic growth that quantum technology can help provide by basically providing more computing power and allowing industries to adopt this technology to do more and more complex tasks as we move forward in the coming years.
Awesome. Yeah. So in the report, I know that you talked about a couple different technologies, right? There's more than one sort of problem that can be addressed in that, right? So help us understand the types of problems that can be unpacked with quantum technologies to help us better understand how they might be applied to industries.
So the best way to do that is through an example and to look at specifics. So I like to think about logistics as a nice example to use where this would really help, where quantum technologies can help. So think about planes, trains, and automobiles, right? So all the people,
not the movie.
Well, you can think about that too. But in this case, just thinking about all the people and all the goods that are moving across the United States and moving across the globe every day, right? Think about all the Amazon packages, think about all the flights, all of that. And so that is a very complex process to organize, especially when you're trying to minimize costs and minimize time, right? Think about the logistics of that process itself. And so in order to become more efficient over time, to lower costs, to lower transportation times, you need more and more computing power to be able to solve a complex problem like that. And so that's a case study where you could see quantum technology that's really able to help in that process because it is able to increase computing power to allow us to solve those types of complex problems. Again, that's just one example among many.
Right.
In South Carolina, another specific example that applies especially here is cybersecurity. We have a very large economic footprint coming from the major military installations that are located across South Carolina. So that's the military footprint is significant in South Carolina, and a lot of those activities rely on or work with cybersecurity and need cybersecurity, and quantum technology can help us to stay at the cutting edge of those resources as well. So all those are very practical ways that we can see quantum technology have the potential to really benefit industries across the board, but especially here in South Carolina.
That's fascinating. And it's part of learning over the past, year and a half about the state, the industries that we have here. Like those are great examples. Those are great case studies for our state. We're fortunate to have those industries in and of themselves in a large way here in the state. In the report, though, there are primary and secondary impacts, right, that can happen through that. And so the really interesting part to me and the powerful part is to start seeing where there's overlap, right? And so there are these industries in and of themselves, but logistics, for example, is going to affect other industries.
Absolutely.
Here in the state, the larger industries in the state. So if you could share a little bit of insight that you found, maybe about the leading industries, help us understand the contextual ways that quantum technologies are going to affect these industries that are best positioned here in the state.
Well, first of all, if we look at the industries that are driving South Carolina's economic growth, they are likely to disproportionately benefit from quantum technology, which is
Mhm.
why investments in this technology in South Carolina are so promising. The potential returns that we could see. So these are going to be industries like advanced manufacturing, which includes aerospace, includes the automotive industry, includes chemical manufacturing, logistics, again, planes, trains, and automobiles that we talked about. So think about all the cargo shipments coming in and out of the port of Charleston and all of the secondary benefits that we see deriving from that, what we call the economic multiplier effect. So think of all the truck drivers, think of all the businesses that have to support the logistics throughout South Carolina. So all of those industries can support can see benefits either directly or indirectly as well. So South Carolina is in a position to disproportionately benefit from these technologies, and the multiplier effect applies across the board as well. So not only when we look at economic benefits, we're not just talking about jobs in these sectors themselves, in logistics or in manufacturing, but think about when people are earning higher wages, they're working in these industries that are growing. When they spend those wages in the local
Going out
economy,
to eat.
exactly, that's where you get benefits in
Sure,
housing
find
and
me.
medical care and yes, all sorts of restaurants across the state as and retail more generally. So all those are secondary benefits, and they derive from the increased productivity, which leads to these higher wages, higher employment creation in the sectors that benefit from quantum technology. So all of that represents a very large economic footprint and generates higher rates of long-run growth. And that's really the core of it when we look at investments in these technologies. We're looking to see higher rates of long-run growth, of economic growth for South Carolina. That's really where the benefit ultimately will be observed.
Super interesting, Joey. I think, I'm not in the business of doing these reports. That's not what I do. The multiplier effect, like that second level of insight, was something that was really interesting to me. And again, like having not doing these types of studies myself, I won't say it was necessarily a surprise, but it was revealing to me, right? So I don't know if it's worth diving into the study a little bit to just explain a little bit about the methodology, just help us understand like how you built this study and what you tapped into to learn what you did.
Well, when you look at the multiplier effects in terms of how those work, typically we like to see industries in South Carolina have high multiplier effects because they're primarily driven by supply chains. In other words, when you have a manufacturer or a major business in South Carolina, if they are relying on local businesses to engage in their operations, then they generate higher multiplier effects, higher secondary effects. So any business, again, to use a manufacturer as an example of that, if they're spending, pick a number, X number of $1 million per year with their suppliers as part of their production process, where are we going to get a bigger impact? We're going to get a bigger impact when those dollars are invested in South Carolina with local suppliers, as opposed to being spent elsewhere in the US, for example, where from the perspective of local economic activity or local economic benefits, those dollars are quote unquote lost.
Yeah.
So we want to see them invested to the extent that we can. And industries that already have high multiplier effects are ones that are also disproportionately likely to benefit from quantum technology. So in other words, we'll see benefits in industries that have high multiplier effects, meaning that when you invest in this technology and to the extent that these companies see benefits and adopt it, you'll see a bigger bang for the buck, so to speak, in terms of an economic return because they're seeing those high multipliers. So that's a real benefit as well. And that goes back to the reasons that quantum technology has the potential to have such a dramatic benefit here, and that the state disproportionately is seeing its economic growth come from these types of industries that are more likely to be able to benefit from quantum technology.
Yep. I'm a fan of context, right? So I want to keep recontextualizing all these different points of emphasis that you have. Maybe this is a two-parter, I don't know, but I'm interested in how this study fits into the larger body of work that you continually create. Like I said, you're the guy every week. So I'm interested in that, like what you've learned about that. And then also like in the study, sort of the population increases and things like that, like the headwinds that we have here in the state that you started to allude to, like, do you have a perspective like in comparison to other states or other areas? But first of all, I just want to know, like, how does this study fit into the larger body of work that you're creating and vice versa, maybe? And then what have you seen outside of the state that how we compare, how we stack up?
Yeah, great question. Well, I would say in general, in terms of looking at this in the broader body of work that we look at in terms of economic impact, This is a bit different. And the reason is because we're not talking about the economic impact of a specific industry or a specific company or specific organization. This is a new technology that has the potential to benefit multiple industries, if not all of them in the long run. And so that makes it unique and a unique contributor, potential contributor to the state's economy. And that's why it has such potential value going forward and why it has the potential to boost productivity growth in the state so much, because it's going to be affecting multiple sectors. So in the report itself, we estimate that we could see an increase in productivity of about 5.7% over the next decade, to the extent that we see quantum technology adopted with companies. And that's a pretty significant increase.
I was going to ask, like 5.7. That's help me understand.
Well,
that.
Productivity growth typically is 2 to 3% in a good year on average. So this is about twice that, or perhaps even higher, depending on the period that we're talking about. And these are permanent gains once we see those realized. Again, that it depends on the rate of adoption, which is the $1 million question, of course.
Yes.
But regardless of the time period, when we see that adoption occur over time, you're going to see exponential gains as it becomes more widely utilized by companies. I think a nice example to illustrate that in terms of the adoption process, you can think about other technologies like the internet, like the smartphone. We're talking about AI now, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of uncertainty there. And I think AI really might be the best analogy, because AI is here and companies
came on fast, right?
Very fast. And companies really are trying they're beginning to use it, but they're still trying to figure out how to implement it into the production process to increase their productivity. Still something, and we talk to companies all the time, and they see the potential benefits, but they're kind of still trying to get their head around how they're going to really adopt it. And I think quantum technology is going to be exactly the same way. It can be a game changer, but it's going to require time for companies to learn more about it and to begin to see how it has practical benefits for the production process and for their business processes more generally.
So that kind of underscores why we're here.
Yes.
Right. So
yes.
we're about workforce development and quantum literacy specifically. And part of our core mission is quantum talent and technology. We like to circle the talent word and talk about the people, and workforce development and quantum literacy is a, direct extension of that. And that's really a missing link. Like you've identified it. Thank you for doing my job for me there. So that's really important. And like you said, it's going to take time, right? So based on what you've learned and what you've seen in these other examples, what's a realistic timeline for not for you to predict it, but what's a realistic timeline that you and I could talk about to say, let's shoot for this, right? Because I think we've seen a hockey stick
Yes.
in the report where it's going to take a while and then that exponential growth happens, which is very exciting. So what's a realistic timeline? And then is there a way or a function that we could serve to even accelerate that or bring that hockey stick closer to home? Shorten the stick.
Yes, shorten the stick. I like that. Well, the hockey stick analogy, I think, is a perfect one, because it illustrates that exponential growth, and you hit a critical point or a critical adoption period where you start to see it become enmeshed in most industry sectors. Normally, when we see the adoption of technology, it takes a period a bit longer than most forecasts initially estimate, by up to a decade or so. So we need to be thinking of years and decades as opposed to months and years. So I think a bit of a longer time frame. And the reason is that initially costs can be high for companies who are looking to invest in the technology, because they see the potential benefits, but they may not see the specific applications. And if there's any kind of disconnect there, which is why education is so important for these companies to learn more about what they can do, that can slow the rate of adoption or slow the rate of investment. So you've got to get through that piece, and then you have to see rapid adoption among companies and industries and the public. So again, to go back to an example that we've seen with previous technologies. So if you look at the internet, which really took off in the 1990s, but really wasn't widely adopted in all areas of the business community till really the early 2000s. So you can think of like a 10-year window there. With smartphones, so the iPhone comes out in, I believe, 2007. And again, it's about 10 years later when sending text to a client is normal, right? So that 10-year adoption period before it's just widely utilized by everyone, and incorporated into community and business norms. And so I think that's probably what we're going to see in some form or fashion with quantum technology. It'll be slowly introduced going forward, And then you see a period of about a decade before it really becomes widespread. Again, I think beyond that, it's hard to speculate what that looks like.
Yeah.
But I think we have to think about the adoption period, and then when do we reach that critical mass where it's more common.
Yep. So I'm still waiting on my first text from Dr. Joey Van Nessen, but maybe we'll get there.
We need to we'll text after this. Yes, we'll solve that problem.
Thinking about that timeline and sort of going inside it, right? Not to be speculative, but you were able to just give us a couple of examples of different technologies that we've all seen, right? Like we went through that, or at least some of us did. I know I went through all of those. Are there common barriers or obstacles within those adoption timelines, or are there specific ones that are related to the industries that you can kind of see, like your understanding of the economics of logistics and manufacturing as they are here in the state? Like, are there sort of watch outs or things that we either need to watch out for, or are there things that in particular we could capitalize on? I don't know if that makes sense. That's
Yeah,
sort of
no, it does.
Question.
It does. I think it really depends on the industry when you look at specific challenges or opportunities. And I think that's another reason why reaching out to two different industries and companies and learning more about what they know and what they don't know about this technology and how they are already thinking about incorporating it or not, and what they are looking at, what their goals are over the next 5 to 10 years. Because another piece of this, and this goes especially to workforce, if we can, as a state or as a region, better identify what the needs are of these industries and these individual companies, then we can look at ways to ensure that quantum technology is able to meet those needs in a faster time frame, and that's going to cause them to adopt the technology. So as economists, we're always talking about incentives, right? That's Econ 101. People and businesses respond to incentives. Yeah. So they're going to want to invest in this technology as soon as they see what the practical benefits are to their companies and to their industries. So the more we can do to link those up, then the faster they're going to get involved.
Yeah, that's a great point. In this industry currently, there is so much talk. Again, go back to like who we are as an organization, like what we've learned. There's so much talk about the technology. It's the hardware, it's the software. We like to talk about peopleware, right? So it's about the people and understanding these problems that people have. So it's interesting to say we're going to talk about quantum technology and the impact of it, but we're not going to talk about quantum technology, right? Like we're going to talk about what your problems are and try to find a way into it like that. Like there are terms that are floated around, and I'm going to say these out loud so people go look for them. Quantum utility, or the difference in quantum advantage and quantum economic advantage, right? To the point at which it makes economic sense to use quantum technology. So I find that really fascinating, and it even unlocks more potential uses for quantum technology to start with the problems. Absolutely. Instead of saying it can do X, Y, Z. Well, it can do X, Y, Z and A, B, C, D and all the other things too. So I'm riffing a little bit, but I think it's just interesting what you were saying.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I like to think of it exactly what you're saying as the difference between features and benefits, right? So the technologies have all these features, but if that doesn't translate into a benefit for a company, then they're not going to be as interested, and it's going to be a harder sell to them. So if you can translate those features into benefits, that's 90% of the battle.
Right. And another sort of hard nut to crack is small business, right?
Yes.
So we talk about industries here. We've said logistics and aerospace. I think we were just talking about aerospace earlier this week, and it's if I'm not mistaken, a $38 billion thereabouts industry here in the States. So that's huge. That's not small business, at least in my definition. So what should small business folks be paying attention to? How do they, if they're interested in it and forward thinking enough to say, hey, I'm ready to start my quantum journey and ask some questions and go seek out things, like where can they start with as far as like the economy and the potential that's there? What would you offer up for them?
Well, I would say just education, learning more about the technology and how it benefits them, and looking at how it can benefit their customers or their client base. And if they can do that, they can see real value that they can add for their different clients and their customer base overall. And the other factor there is cost. When we're talking about small businesses, they are typically going to be much more sensitive to to cost. Not that large businesses aren't, but small businesses typically have more financial limitations.
Constraints.
Yeah, yes. Constraint. That's a good word for it. And so they are more likely to adopt the technology once there is that direct benefit, rather than necessarily investing in an unknown. So I think the benefits have to even be more clear for these small businesses, or for any company that's more cost constrained. And for the small business community, that's largely the case in many cases.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing logistics and aerospace and all that kind of stuff, and my business is not in those, again, we're not necessarily being prescriptive here, but is there something in this whole conversation that I could latch onto and say, well, maybe there is something there for me, based on what you learned in the study? Like, and maybe this goes back to the multiplier effect. Like, is there something in that, a story that we could tell to folks?
Yeah, I think the main thing would be more of the secondary effect, and looking at which businesses, which industries are going to see potentially the biggest benefits, and at least in the short run, and to what extent are you serving those markets?
Yep.
And if you're especially trying to take advantage of growing sectors, which every business is, right, trying to identify target markets, you want to be looking in markets that are growing, that are likely to grow going forward. So if you're a small business and less apt to take a risk on a technology that you can't immediately see the benefit from, maybe take a look at what industries are going to see an immediate benefit from, and look at broadening your customer base to serving those industries. Because if they're growing, if they're likely to grow more in the future, then you're going to be better off connecting to them now and starting the legwork for that process. Because if you're as any business knows, if you're trying to adjust your target market or go after new clients, that's a time-intensive process. That doesn't happen overnight. So starting now, learning more about the technology, how it's going to be incorporated more broadly, and then what's the most effective niche for you to serve that can be involved in the process.
Right. And in that, I'm even hearing there's the potential to start businesses.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I'd like to pull back up again. We've talked about the technology in these industry sectors for a moment. Pull back up to the state level again. And there's another part of the report that talks about the population increases, the makeup of our workforce. And just tell us a little bit about what you learned in that area of the report around the workforce makeup and the population increases, and what's the flux of the folks who are out there.
Well, from the perspective of long run growth in South Carolina, the future is very bright already. And again, another reason why investments in the technology in South Carolina can generate disproportionate benefits overall, because if we're looking to grow already, then we can essentially latch onto that and say, well, this is the time to boost productivity so that we can, again, get a bigger bang for the buck when we're seeing economic growth that's already happening, right? If we're growing, why not add that additional technology and help us to do it in a more effective and faster way?
And sorry to interrupt, but like for folks who don't know, like at what rate are we growing? So if we're in South Carolina.
Yeah. So if we look in South Carolina, we've seen growth. Let's look at employment growth, for example, where we've been number one in the country over the last year.
Okay.
So that's been very strong.
Yeah.
So around, to put a number on it, about,
does that make your job easier or harder?
Well, that's a great question. It's always easier to deliver good news. I'll tell you that. So coming out of this is an aside, but coming out of the Great Recession, when we're trying to establish what's happening and the rate of growth.
I lived through that too.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you and me both. And it's hard to deliver news when you're not expecting good strong growth, at least in the short run. And of course, everybody was struggling during that period. But very different economy than we're facing now, fortunately. But yeah, South Carolina is doing well overall and in the short run. But from the purposes of investments, we want to be looking at long-term trends.
Okay.
And that's where the Southeast is doing well relative to the U.S. And of course, South Carolina being in the heart of the Southeast. We see that, number one, in terms of population growth.
Okay.
And this region of the country is expected to see more population gains than any other region over the next 30 years. By this region, meaning the Southeast.
Right.
And South Carolina has been ranked in the top 5 of all states in the country for population growth since the pandemic. So we were number 4 last year. Last year meaning 2024.
Right.
And we were number 1 in 2023.
Wow.
So consistently in the top 5. And what does that mean from a practical perspective? Why does population growth matter? Well, among other things, it means the logistics industry is going to be a big driver of our growth going forward, because you look at companies like Walmart and Amazon, you look at the port and all of this, the infrastructure that's required to deliver consumer goods where they are. And if there are more and more people living in this region of the country, then companies and organizations are going to be wanting to locate in and around South Carolina to import and distribute consumer goods to customers. And so that puts South Carolina in a very competitive position to compete for more and more logistics-based companies. And again, how are we going to compete? We have to invest in the technologies that can help them to grow and satisfy that demand. And so that goes back to the benefits that quantum technologies can potentially offer. So population growth is a big piece of that. And I would say from a long-term trend, that's really number one. The employment trends we talk about are accompany that, as we're seeing more opportunity in this part of the country and in South Carolina as well. So that's one major sector. We've talked a bit about manufacturing. And then a third one I'll mention that we really haven't talked about yet is healthcare.
Yeah.
Because
let's hit them all.
We got more people and we're aging.
Yes.
Right. We're getting older.
Don't remind me.
As a country, the baby boomers are retiring, and South Carolina actively recruits retirees to move to South Carolina. We've always been a retirement destination. We've marketed ourselves as such, and we're aging faster than the U.S. as a whole.
Okay.
So we've got a larger population coming in. Our existing population is aging more rapidly.
Yep.
And so all that means is that we're going to have a higher demand for healthcare. And so if we think about the technologies that are advanced, where we're seeing advances in medicine, again, that's another area where quantum technology can potentially help. So the bottom line is that all these sectors that are driving our growth can benefit from quantum technology. So it's we're very bullish about the future.
Yeah. That's awesome. Is there any kind of like perfect storm inside of that? Because when I hear that as a layman, again, such that I am, we've got an aging population, so they're going to need healthcare, which means they're not going to be working.
Yes.
So,
yes.
And then we're going to have all these jobs because of all these, this new technology, and like, just help me connect the dots. And that's what's so valuable about working with you on this study is again, your larger body of work, you're connecting the dots to all these other studies and are able to give that context again. So if anybody out there is hearing this and saying like, oh, well, there's going to be a, day of reckoning somewhere along the way, like that's a little bold. And I'm not making a projection, but just help me understand how those dots connect,
Sure,
like aging population, healthcare versus jobs. Like how does all that fit?
No, it's a great question. And you're exactly right. I agree. The day of reckoning might be a little extreme.
Yeah. Strike that from the record. Strike that from the record.
But it's accurate that we do have an emerging worker shortage, and this is happening because of slower population growth across the U.S.
And it's not happening because technology is taking jobs.
It's primarily happening because of the aging population that we're seeing, and we've seen an acceleration of that trend since the pandemic, because effectively in 2020, baby boomers retired en masse,
right?
And that was because during 2020 itself, many workers were concerned about, and baby boomers were concerned about getting sick, particularly in the period before the vaccine was available.
Yep.
And critically, their financial portfolio was doing pretty well. Yep. So that's the other key piece of that, because the stock market was booming. So, if you're thinking about retiring in the next few years, you're worried about getting sick if you go to work. Hey, I'm doing well financially. That's kind of an excuse to go ahead and get out. And so we saw, rather than a slow and steady pace
like
of baby boomer retirements, natural retirements.
Yeah.
And it's compressed. And so we noticed that as a nation in terms of a worker shortage that emerged. And because of slower population growth at the national level, that's going to continue to be a challenge. And in South Carolina as well, because we're attracting a lot of older Americans. So what does that mean for the worker shortage? It means that it's a challenge we have to address. But quantum technology and technology in general, when we look at the adoption of AI and other technologies, that can help us to address that workforce shortage. Because while much of these technologies will augment what workers are doing, in some cases that can help limit the need for workforce in certain occupations, as we see workers move to others, and companies may need fewer workers than they had before, which, given that we have a shortage right now, that can be a positive thing because the workforce shortage is not going away. That's going to be something we see for the foreseeable future.
Yep. Another thing we haven't touched on really, where the state is, another area that the state is rich in is our academic institutions, right? So you work at USC's Darla Moore School of Business, an R1 university. That's not the only R1 university in the state.
The only one we mentioned right here, right?
It's friendly confines here. But we also have, a robust network of regional universities, HBCUs. We have a national lab and everything going on there. We have a strong partnership with our governor's school. So and the technical school system is robust as well. So we've got a huge wealth of the academic, on the academic side of this too. Is there anything in the study, or again, what in connecting these dots? Because we talk about collaboration, right? So academic institutions working with industry sectors, entrepreneurs, I just want to cover all the bases here and connect all the dots that we can. And is there an insight that you can offer up about the academic institutions and their pairings or potential pairings with industry, and how do we strengthen that and make that more dynamic, I guess, if we can?
Yeah, well, I think that's going to be critical, increasingly critical for all universities, all educational organizations to reach out to industry, to reach out to businesses, and to find what their needs are going forward, and making students aware of career opportunities and investing in the technologies so that they can teach students, make them comfortable with these technologies so that they can help businesses meet their needs, because that's going to be the key to growth. I think we do a good job of that in South Carolina. We need to be doing more of it, no question about it. And learning more about quantum technology, and again, how does that link back to businesses, and what do we need to be teaching students at the college level, or even in K through 12, introducing them to these potential these technologies, and specifically what they need to be looking at and what they might want to be interested in from a career perspective.
Yeah, maybe that even goes back to an earlier part of or a different part of our conversation where we were talking about the learning curve, right? Whether it was for the internet or our iPhones or any of these technological advancements that have happened over as long as we've been building them, how they sort of sneak up on us.
Yes.
And so maybe there's something there where, as a state, prioritizing the educational component of that and I think going upstream.
Yeah, I think you hit on that we have to prioritize, because we don't want to, you hit on a good point, that we don't want to fall behind.
Yeah.
Right. And that's easy to do. Because you hit this threshold when everybody's using the technology, and if you are unaware of it, and all of a sudden everybody's using it, and you don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I don't know I don't have a login.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're not ahead, you're behind. So I think certainly from a university perspective, learning more about where these technologies are headed, what the practical applications could be, and how do we introduce that into the classroom or into the research space as soon as possible? Because again, if you're not leading, you're following, and we want to make sure that we can continue to capitalize on the economic momentum of the state, and that's the only way to do it.
So Joey, if we dive into the report, part of this is about the jobs growth that we might experience, right?
Yes.
So we're looking at, if we can advocate this, if we find a way to implement this in a meaningful way, we could potentially see around 20,000 jobs created here in the state. If we want to unpack that a little bit, we can look at, say, well, what are the job roles? Like, is it going to be PhDs like typing out programs, or is it going to be people, in high tech labs? Like, there are lots of roles that are going to come about within that 20,000 number, but there are a lot of job roles that are going to be in that 20,000 number, right? So what are some of the roles that you see, or how would you characterize those roles? And let's not leave off the table the idea that as we get into this, there might be new businesses that are created.
And we've talked about the phrase that you've used, a long on-ramp. And which is basically another analogy for the hockey stick, right? You see a very low adoption rate, and then all of a sudden it's here and it goes up exponentially. And so as you see this on-ramp, you see the slow adoption, companies begin to utilize the technology, and we can see it helping existing employees engage in their work more productively. You can see new occupations be created that is associated with R&D. It can be associated with helping to introduce new technology to a specific production process, all sorts of things we don't know.
And maybe at this stage, we're still talking about like sort of the pillars, right? Like
Yeah,
we're still in
exactly.
that sort of
Kind of that
main,
foundation of integrating the technology into the workplace and the skills required to be able to do that. That can set up a whole new set of occupations that we're just now beginning to learn about, and
Right.
many we don't know. And then to your point about new business creation as well, that's going to be important too. That's another part of these multiplier effects, which we talked
Right.
about before. And you can imagine, particularly for small businesses that may be cost constrained, not be able to invest in these technologies, but still want to be able to take advantage of it as quickly as possible. So you can imagine businesses that are formed specifically to service small businesses, to provide that access point or be the liaison to these technologies. You can imagine a whole host of businesses focused specifically on doing that. So you can either integrate it into the business if you're a larger company, or you can rely on a company to help you do that. So there are multiple ways to get access to the technology. So you can see many paths towards adoption in the long run.
Yeah. And just to go back to that multiplier effect, how important it actually is in this report, and why it jumped off the page.
It's the majority of the job creation,
right? So
which is
if
what we want. I mean, that's a good thing.
Yeah, and if it's and if I'm looking at the dollars, it's 3.6 out of $8.5 billion. So
Yes.
like there's nothing to dismiss.
Yes.
Because it's a multiplier. Like it's a huge deal. And I would like to think that like the ingenuity of folks like with the new businesses and things, like it's kind of the sky's the limit.
Absolutely.
As far as like the story will write itself.
Yes.
But it goes back to the implementation point too. So that's another really big point in the report. So I'd like to touch on that a little bit. That none of this happens if we don't implement it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. We've got to be proactive with it. And we have to think about, at the end of the day, what's the real reason to do this? What's the practical benefit for the average American or the average South Carolinian? And that goes back to basic economic growth. Why do we care about economic growth at all? Very simple question.
Right.
And the answer is because that helps improve our standards of living. And for the average South Carolinian, that is manifested through more opportunities, more job creation that individuals have access to, and higher wages, which allows them to live a better life. So the adoption of these technologies that allow for productivity to go up over time helps to increase access to positions, more job creation,
Right.
which we talk about, as well as higher quality jobs, meaning higher wages and higher wage growth. So that's the whole game right there. And that's why technology is important in general, and why quantum technology is going to help us get there even faster. So there's a lot of growth to come in a positive way.
So diving into the study a little bit more, this was a partnership between Darla Moore and SC Quantum. So we're fortunate to say, and we're proud to say, that our state legislature invested in this idea, this concept of something new, to be a leader. And not every state has done that.
Mm-hmm.
Only a handful have. But you do see it in places like Chicago, New Mexico, and Maryland, and up in Boston, and places like that. And of course, when people think of technology, they think of Silicon Valley. And so it's even in our name, right? South Carolina Quantum.
Yes.
Like when I talk to people, they're like, what quantum?
Right.
Like who quantum? And it's like, no, it's South Carolina Quantum. And they're like, oh, okay, well, tell me about that, because I wouldn't have expected that. And again, that's more props to the legislature for taking that initiative to be proactive about it. So I'm interested to hear from you, who knows more about the numbers behind the pride that we have and the sense of urgency that we have around it. Like, why South Carolina?
Right.
Why?
Yeah. It's a great question, because South Carolina is a small state.
Right.
And so sometimes when you think about economic development or you think about economic growth, South Carolina doesn't necessarily pop to the top of your head, top of your mind.
Unless you're moving here.
For most people. Right. Unless you're moving here. But the legislature has been very forward thinking, and they know that our state is actually growing at among the fastest rates in the country, which again, not everybody is aware of, but you can certainly see it if you live here, particularly in Greenville, Spartanburg, and Columbia, and Charleston, and Myrtle Beach, which have been growing very, very fast in recent years. And so these industries that we've talked about that are driving South Carolina's growth, everything from healthcare to logistics to advanced manufacturing, all will disproportionately benefit from investments in and the adoption of quantum technology. And so that's why South Carolina is poised to really benefit more than most from these technologies as we look forward. And again, the legislature recognizes this. Industry, to a large extent, already recognizes this, which is why they're taking these technological advancements very seriously, learning about them, learning about what practical applications they offer. So South Carolina is in a very strong position going forward. So it makes a lot of sense once you scratch beneath the surface and say, well, what's really driving growth in the state? Recognizing that we are a leader at the national level. And once you understand what's driving that, investments in quantum technology really are a no-brainer.
So what you're saying is this is not a reach to be happening here.
Right? Exactly. It's something we've got to take very seriously.
And this is something that could be a sense of pride for the state.
Absolutely.
And, short to long terms. We're still on a hockey stick, but it could be a real groundswell of momentum for the state and everybody who lives here.
Yes, it can be a real game changer for the state. And the question is just how long that takes. How do we engage, practically speaking, in the investment? Where do we see those applications and benefits to industry? So all those are very good questions. And South Carolina being very proactive and asking and hoping to answer those sooner rather than later will keep us ahead of the curve and allow us to build on this great momentum that we've established in recent years.
So I think you've already answered my question, but this is all very exciting, especially what we were just saying, how this is a game changer. I'm interested in knowing what's the next best step. Like you just laid out like 4 or 5 steps, right? It's just us talking, right? So what's the next best step that we could take from your perspective, where you sit, having done this research and again, being able to connect the dots to everything you know about the state, being so plugged in, what's the next best step that we could take?
I think from a very practical perspective, we go back to what we talked about before, and that's distinguishing between features and benefits. I think that's what it comes down to. And we know what the features are of quantum technology. How do they translate into practical benefits for companies in this state and for industries in this state? And the more that we can do to bridge that gap and communicate that to businesses, the more quickly they're going to adopt the technology and the faster we're going to see the benefits actually realized in South Carolina. So as a next step, focusing on turning those features into benefits is critical, and then communicating those benefits to industries in the state.
Awesome. And I know it might be hard for you to not put a number on it, but let's say 10 years from now, what is success? If that's our next best step, say we do that in 10 years, 5 years, 10 years, let's say 10 years, what does success feel like for us as a state? Like what is it like out there?
Well, success basically means we see a significant increase in productivity, which leads to job and income creation and total economic activity going up in a significant way. And so what the study does is looks at what that could mean over a roughly 10-year period. And it's basically an $8.5 billion impact for the state of South Carolina. We talked about how that's tied to about 20,000 jobs. And just to put that,
you had to put a number on it, didn't you?
But just to put that in perspective, like what does $8.5 billion mean?
Right.
That's basically the equivalent to one of South Carolina's largest employers.
Wow.
Right. So and that's just in the first period of adoption. Of course, it can increase further from there. So these are not small changes, small benefits, and they're only going to get larger. So I think that would be a best case scenario. Again, if we from a practical standpoint, move those features to benefits as quickly as possible.
Yep. Amazing stuff. Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And let's keep the ball rolling.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
Thank you, Joey.